Good evening, friends. Tonight, let's step quietly into the sun-drenched, olive-fragrant world of ancient Greece, a time famous for its thinkers, its beginnings of democracy, and those statues with notably little concern for trousers. Yet, behind well-known names like Plato and places like Sparta, beneath the shining temples, there is a far less glamorous reality. For all its achievements, daily life in ancient Greece was a battle many of us today might not endure. Before we settle in, if you find yourself enjoying this journey together, feel free to like and subscribe, only if it feels right to you. And if you'd like, leave a comment sharing your location and the time of day. It's always moving to see this circle reach across the globe. Now, perhaps dim the lights, perhaps start a gentle fan for that soft humming companion, and let's step slowly into this old world, side by side. In ancient Greece, your morning wouldn't begin with the beeping of an alarm. Instead, it was the sun, turning your home into a slow roasting cave. Your shelter was simple, sun-hardened mud bricks or rough stone, with only small window openings, just wood to keep out roaming goats and, if fortune smiled, the faintest breeze. There was no insulation, no gently spinning fan, and very little room to call your own, unless you counted the one spot the family goat hadn't claimed. You didn't wake early by choice or discipline, but because the summer heat demanded it. Those thick walls, so heavy with warmth, now released it right back at you. In winter, the same walls trapped the cold, and you'd huddle beneath the thinnest of covers, wishing warmth would find you before frostbite did. Sleep was had on modest mats or straw mattresses. No pillow, just a rolled cloak or your own arm, hoping the lice spared you for one night, though they rarely did. There was no faucet to turn in the morning. You began your day by trudging to a public fountain, or if you lived further out, walking to a well. You'd carry back water in clay pots, quiet prayers in your heart that none would drop and waste all your effort and strain. Baths didn't happen to start the day, or always even at its close. Instead, you might rinse your face, rub olive oil on your skin, and then scrape it away with a curved metal tool. A ritual less like a luxury and more like a hopeful gesture. Forget about privacy. Your entire family lived, slept, ate, and argued in a shared space. The street outside was not just a road, but your hallway, bulletin board, and dump all rolled into one. Hunger was quick to follow. Your back would hurt, sweat beading already, and your tunic would cling awkwardly. Oddly enough, this was likely the easiest part of your day. So let's talk about breakfast, the most humble meal you can imagine. Modern diets would seem lavish by comparison. You started with barley bread, hard, often old, and nearly as tasteless as the dirt nearby. Made from simple ground barley and water, pressed flat and baked on hot stones or last night's ashes. Picture a granola bar, missing sweetness, crunch, or delight. Maybe you'd dip it into watered-down wine, since the common water was risky, unfiltered, and sometimes dangerous to drink. With no pitchers chilling in your pantry, this diluted wine was for everyone, child or elder, not for pleasure, but necessity. If by chance you were wealthy, perhaps a fig, a handful of olives, or a bit of goat cheese would lighten your plate. But if not, you were lucky if your bread wasn't crawling with yesterday's flies or so hard it hurt your teeth. No coffee to wake you up, no eggs, no honey, unless you lived by a generous beekeeper and knew how to bargain. Breakfast wasn't a leisurely meal. No chairs, no forks, no mindful chewing. You ate quickly, nodded, and readied yourself for work ahead. And if you were a woman, tradition often meant waiting to eat until after the men, with children at your side. Turns of disappointment, one after another. Curiously, the same people who praised grand banquets and sang about wine never spared a poem for breakfast. That first meal was basic, sometimes burnt, but you pressed through. It was the only thing standing between you and a long day filled with sun, work, and sometimes heated debate. After your bite of dense bread and a mouthful of wine-diluted water, it was time, in theory, to try to freshen up. Though for Greeks, cleanliness was less about being clean and more about ritual. Soap and lather? Not for centuries yet to come. Your morning washing, if you even managed, might mean pouring cold water over yourself at a communal fountain or family basin. Bathhouses existed here and there, but most people had only a bucket and the open air. There was no shampoo, no fragrant body washes, and no puffy sponges unless you could spare one from a diver. Instead, you'd rub olive oil on your skin to gather dirt and sweat, then scrape it away with a curved bronze tool, leaving you less oily, yet never exactly fresh. Imagine covering yourself in salad oil, then scraping it off with a knife. That was your version of skincare. Hygiene was shared, usually done in the presence of others. Private washing simply didn't exist. Looking after your teeth? There were no toothbrushes or pastes. If you were fortunate, you'd rub your gums with charcoal or rinse with a bit of vinegar. But more often, you just chewed on a twig, hoping for mercy. Smell was simply a fact of life, though if you could afford it, a drop of perfume could go on your neck before braving a long walk in the sun. Clothes were rarely washed, perhaps beaten on stones at the river, or perhaps not at all for months at a stretch. In short, grooming wasn't about looks or scent. It was about trying to look a bit better than you did the day before, and not by much. Having wiped the oil away, it was time to dress, if you can call it that. The Greek wardrobe was famously simple, almost impractical. You had two choices, a rectangle of linen or wool, pinned or belted together. No shaping, no sewing to fit, and certainly no hope during a sudden gust of wind. No undergarments, no support for women. Everyone simply hoped the pins held, and that there'd be no embarrassing mishaps. As for shoes, if you owned sandals, you were lucky. Otherwise, you spent your days barefoot, walking over hot stones, dusty paths, and all the messes left by market animals. Every step was a challenge, like crossing a summer skillet mixed with all kinds of hazards. There was nothing to block the sun, except perhaps a broad hat for farmers and sailors. Sunscreen didn't exist. The sun would find its way to your skin, burning shoulders and faces, no matter your wisdom or rank. The daily commute could bring surprise, too, for nudity, whether among athletes training outdoors or orators holding their audience together with only a loose robe. If you had means, perhaps your outfit was dyed a gentle purple or deep yellow, but most wore brown or off-white, as colors were costly, and few could afford them for everyday wear. You passed through life like a walking linen bundle, hoping your fastenings would not fail under the watchful gaze of a priest or townsfolk. Yet, before noon, your chores were only half finished. Military duty was not just a job, but an expectation for every free-born man. Especially in leading cities, like Athens and Sparta, each boy and man was a soldier. Training began young, sometimes as early as childhood, learning to march together, shield to shield as one. In certain places, training was simply survival. The young faced hardship, underfeeding, and strict rules, all to make stronger fighters. In Athens, the approach was less harsh but no less compulsory. Years of training and ongoing service followed. To refuse was not an option. Even great thinkers served as soldiers. Wars were common, whether against enemies from afar or neighbors with an old score to settle. Peace was only a pause. If you could afford armor, you bought it yourself. A sturdy helmet, a breastplate, and a shield were your responsibility, not the city's. The poorest soldiers had little more than leather, standing at the front and at most risk. In between battles, soldiers cleaned weapons, practiced, argued military plans, or rowed mighty ships for the fleet. There were no rewards afterward. only scars, aging aches, and brief remembrance on simple graves. But if you think men had it hard, learn what women faced. In most cities, women had fewer rights than furniture. No vote, no property, no public presence without a guardian. Seen outside too often, and whispers would start. Assumptions about unruliness or worse. The day for a woman began early, far before dawn, filled with endless tasks, spinning, weaving, baking, cleaning, and caring for children, perhaps running a household of servants, always in charge but never given authority or rest. Social life was almost none, their world often confined to the women's quarters, their friends seen only through wooden lattice windows. Education was rare. Most learned only what was needed to look after a home. Books and mathematics, those were for the boys. The future was already chosen. Marry young, often to an older man selected by your father, with love a mere afterthought and a dowry an absolute requirement. Having children, especially sons, became a woman's entire worth. In Sparta, things were slightly different. Women there trained, learned, and inherited more. But this was less freedom than a demand to raise the next generation of warriors, still held tightly by laws and expectations. Even the goddesses, celebrated in myth, did not reflect the lives of ordinary girls and women who were to stay quiet, invisible, and homebound. And then there's that proud word, democracy. Athens is celebrated as its birthplace. In truth, most people were left out. To take part, you had to be a male citizen, born to citizen parents, and over a certain age. Women, outsiders, slaves, and children, most of the population, in fact, could not vote or speak at the city's gatherings. Those who did qualify didn't just vote. They were expected to help decide every law and serve on juries and councils, chosen not by merit, but by lottery. Unskilled men might end up managing public funds or judging a crime, whatever their background. If someone became too popular, too skilled, or simply annoyed the crowd, citizens could banish him for a decade. No court, just a vote. Yet, for all its unevenness, this system shaped the way many societies have since organized themselves, even if it fell painfully short of fairness for most people. Women, foreigners, and slaves could only watch or hope for change they'd never see. Slavery was woven into every layer of life in Greece. Almost every household owned someone, not as a mark of luxury, but as a daily reality. There was rarely a thought that things could be different. Slaves could be from anywhere, captured in war, born to enslaved parents, or taken through misfortune. Some taught children, managed homes, even handled money. Most, though, cooked, fetched, cleaned, carried burdens in silence. Some labored in hellish conditions, in mines, cramped and choking, hoping only to live through another day. Even those who earned freedom did so with limits. Never truly citizens, never fully included. Most philosophers calmly declared this was simply the way of things. When it came to health, hope, and home remedies were often all you had. No hospitals, and only the most privileged could see a physician, who might base treatment on an odd theory of body fluids. Fevers got bloodletting. Sadness was met with walks or prayers. Garlic, boiled plants, sometimes scraped goat bits. Cures were unpredictable, and surgery was terrifying. Done with bare tools, no pain relief, and much guesswork. Childbirth fell to experienced women, but many mothers and babies never survived. The poor relied on whatever the neighborhood wisdom or faith could provide. Some small comfort. Doctors at least advised rest and fresh air. For the Greeks, the theater was not simply leisure. It was almost sacred. Citizens gathered by the thousands, crowded on stone seats carved into the earth, to watch stories unfold from sunrise to sunset. Tragedies tore at the heart. Comedies poked fun at leaders and ideas alike. Actors in masks and costumes, all men, brought stories to life while choruses sang and danced, sometimes louder than the audience itself. People responded openly, hissing, weeping, laughing, even shouting back their opinions. Theater was an active experience, and at festival's end, prizes could go to the most moving or the most ridiculous play, everything decided by a jury of peers. After a long day lost in performance, you'd wander into the agora, the city's buzzing center, and meet people literally asking life's biggest questions. Philosophy wasn't hidden in dim corners. It was as much a public sport as anything else. Those famous thinkers like Socrates, Plato, or Aristotle were known not as icons, but as men who simply couldn't let a question go. Socrates himself roamed the marketplace, challenging anyone who would listen, or perhaps just someone trying to buy figs, to wrestle with ideas like, what is truth, and how should we live? The conversations could last hours and leave you reeling. No one was off limits. You could be swept into a never-ending argument, whether you liked it or not. Even teenagers like Alexander the Great found themselves trained by these men, given the tools to change the world before they were old enough to shave. Life in ancient Athens could be lively, clever, and filled with opportunity, unless by chance you became a little too well-liked. Once a year, citizens could decide to banish someone for a full 10 years. No trial, just a group vote with pottery shards. Often, those sent away were not the villains, but the successful, the admired, or simply those who stood out. Banishment was temporary. After a decade, you could return, your place in the city restored. But it was a chilling reminder that even in a place called a democracy, popularity had its dangers. In this land, death was always near. Life expectancy rarely reached beyond the mid-30s, even less for those who didn't survive childhood illnesses. Danger waited in simple places, a cut, a fever, or the struggles of childbirth. Crowded cities and dirty water helped diseases spread quickly. War was always present, and battles claimed countless lives. The gods, too, stood ready to take offense. Neglect a ritual and you might meet disaster. Crops ruined, ships sunk, sickness sent to your door. The afterlife was only peaceful if burial rites were done correctly. Otherwise, one risked being forgotten both on earth and in spirit. The Greek faith was woven into daily life, covering everything from farming to politics to home life. The gods were respected, but also feared, quick to punish, able to turn successes to losses without warning. Every small misfortune might be the sign of a forgotten prayer or an ancient family offense. Through it all, the endless chores, the simple meals, toil and debates, the illnesses and risks, the longing for safety and meaning, the Greeks endured. Most of us today, dropped in their world, would last little more than a morning. The heat, the labor, limited rights, and sudden hardships would soon erase our modern dreams of marble, wisdom, and song. But they pressed on, building temples, writing plays, wrestling with hard ideas, setting the foundations for everything from science to politics. They shaped the age as they sweated through it, never because it was simple, but because meaning mattered more than comfort. No, you might not last long, caught by the sun or perhaps by a philosopher in the street. Yet if you listened, learned, and held on, you'd stand among some of the most hardworking, passionate, and complex people the world has ever known. And if you stumbled, they would not scold you. They'd simply hand you a tunic, point out the nearest amphora, and tell you, quite kindly, "There you go. Now carry that up the hill." It all began with loss and betrayal. Prasutagus, king among the Iceni in the land now known as Eastern England, carried on as Rome's ally for many years. He ruled with some autonomy and peace, all while remaining valuable to the empire. When he died, hoping to protect those he loved, he willed his lands to both the Roman emperor and his two young daughters, thinking this shared gift would keep his people safe. But Rome did not keep his trust. With little warning and no respect, Roman officials took over the kingdom in full. Soldiers swarmed in, seizing lands, flocks, homes, and gold. Yet what hurt most was not this loss of riches. It was the cruelty that followed. They publicly beat his widow, Queen Boudica, and did not stop there. Their violence toward her daughters was meant as a message: you are powerless, and we will break you. They misjudged her. Rather than destroy her, their actions shaped Boudica into a force powerful enough to unsettle the greatest empire of her day. The harm and injustice visited upon her family traveled quickly, carried by those who remembered their own grief. Their lands taken, loved ones lost, traditions mocked. Suddenly, the tribes of Britain who had long been divided shared one bond: outrage and the will to resist. Rome's breaking of its promise, its treaty, and its dignity was not simply a misstep. It became the spark for the fiercest uprising Rome had yet faced. Boudica, expected by her enemies to fade away or submit, instead became a leader, one remembered for her strength and fiery spirit, with long red hair and a voice that could still a crowd. Gone was the woman Rome tried to humiliate. In her place was a mother who saw no future left to lose. Honoring what her people valued most, cooperation and unity, she moved from tribe to tribe. To the Trinovantes, once powerful but now reeling from hardship, she spoke honestly of pain and betrayal, reminding them of their ancestors and lost freedoms. She offered no guarantees, only the promise of dignity, glory, and, if needed, a noble death. Other tribes began to listen, and their old wounds found new hope in shared rebellion. She rallied them not from behind, but right in their midst, riding her chariot, loose hair flying, eyes determined. She reminded everyone of those who had suffered, called upon the Celtic war spirits, and became the living symbol of her people's defiance. Military drills or Roman tactics weren't her tools. She wielded a righteous anger fused with a deep sense of purpose. This was more than revolt. It was the reawakening of a people. As her resolve grew, so did her following. Large gatherings took place beneath ancient trees and on moonlit hillsides. Boudica stood among her allies, listening carefully, learning from the wise and the grieving. Warriors gathered, armed with whatever they could, both men and women, shaping a fighting force from shepherds and farmers and even former Roman slaves. Her army multiplied into thousands, each heart moved by memories of injustice and the chance to live free from oppression. Before marching, Boudica promised her followers there would be victory or death, but never surrender. Their first target was Camulodunum, once a center of British strength, now a bustling Roman settlement. Standing at its heart, the temple to their conqueror was a constant reminder of everything her people had lost. Boudica's army swept in, overwhelming the outnumbered and unprepared defenders. The temple, intended for safety, became a tomb as Boudica's followers crashed through Roman defenses, sparing few lives. Their destruction was not senseless. It was deliberate, a reclaiming of dignity, land, and history. News of this calamity rushed to the Roman governor, far to the west. By the time he learned the truth, the city was ashes and the rebellion unstoppable. But there was no time for Boudica to linger. Another city, larger, richer, yet wide open, lay ahead. Londinium, recently risen along the Thames, had thrived as a center for trade and Roman power. As Boudica's army drew near, panic spread. The Roman governor, understanding the city could not be held, chose to withdraw, taking with him those who moved quickly. He left behind the weak, the old, and any who doubted that a woman's army could threaten Rome. When Boudica's warriors arrived, Londinium's markets and villas fell in hours. Survivors were few. Boudica's people moved methodically, flames and cries filling the air, the city's destruction witnessed for miles around. This was not wild violence, but a gathering storm, a lesson to all who still thought Rome could not fall. Historians wrote that tens of thousands lost their lives. The details were terrible for both sides. Through all this, Boudica herself led from the front, never replaced by another, her daughters close by. With Londinium gone, another city fell just as quickly. Verulamium burned, its ashes layered deep in the ground, still visible centuries later. Each victory had a cost. Supplies dwindled, some unity began to fray, but the fear Boudica inspired only grew. Rome, never quick to retreat, summoned all its power. The governor gathered the toughest legions he could find, chose his ground carefully, and waited. Boudica had turned heartbreak into a movement, turning Rome's confidence to terror. At last, both sides stood together, prepared for the storm's final clash, a crisis not just of swords, but of what story Britannia and Rome would remember, the empire unshaken, or the spirit of a queen who would not bow. Governor Gaius had chosen the ground for his last stand with great care. He was no ordinary leader. He was someone who had faced danger and survived. While Queen Barissa's followers cheered for their earlier wins, Gaius was already planning. He picked a narrow pass hemmed in by thick woods and steep hills, a place where Barissa's overwhelming numbers would be less of an advantage. The Roman force was small, possibly around 10,000 in number, but each soldier was hardened by the discipline and training of the legions. Barissa's army, in contrast, was huge. Some ancient writers say as many as 200,000 gathered under her banner. But they were not trained soldiers. They were farmers, metal workers, chieftains, and those yearning to be free. Brave and determined, yet untrained in battle, filled with passion but not discipline. They believed that sheer numbers would sweep the Romans away like a great wave. They were mistaken. As her army drew closer, Barissa stood tall atop her war chariot, her daughters by her side, and offered one final speech. She spoke of the wrongs they had suffered, the beatings, the assaults, the lands stolen, and the homes set on fire. She called upon the goddess across the ages, remembered the ancestors, and promised that they would have either victory or death. Her words stirred the fighters, who shouted their approval and placed their faith in the gods to see them through. The battle began. The warriors of the island rushed forward with a wild anger, filling the field with shouts and fury. Gaius stood his ground. He waited, holding the Romans in tight formation in the narrow space. Then, at precisely the right moment, he launched the Roman defense. Spears were thrust in unison, shields locked together like a single wall, and the short, sharp swords found their marks among the disorganized crowd. Wave after wave of the islanders crashed against that unbreakable wall of iron, but every time, the Romans held. Then the troops began to press ahead, step by step, moving as one, fearless and exacting. Behind them, the islanders' families and wagons had followed, hoping to witness a Roman defeat. But as panic spread, these became deadly obstacles. The warriors couldn't retreat, and the crowded space became a place of chaos and slaughter. When the dust finally settled, the outcome was clear. Tens of thousands of the island's people had fallen. The rebellion, once fierce, was now broken. The empire had been tested, but it had not yielded. Barissa had given everything she had, and although she lost this fight, the memory of her bravery would live on, louder than the clatter of weapons. No one can say with certainty what became of her. Her last moments remain unknown. Some Roman writers claim she ended her own life, unwilling to be captured, while others say illness took her. Yet, the one thing everyone agrees upon is this: she disappeared. No queen in chains was dragged through Roman streets, no public execution occurred, no scenes of final shame. She simply vanished, like a fierce storm fading with the wind. And in that silence, something remarkable took place. Barissa was no longer just a queen. She became a legend. The empire, still shaken by the uprising, tried to erase her story, but it was far too late. Her name passed quietly in songs around fires, whispered in sacred groves. To her people, she was never simply a rebel who lost. She became a martyr, a warrior and mother who stood against the world's mightiest empire and made it bleed. Even among her enemies, there was a measure of respect. Latin authors described her with awe, not as a mere savage, but as a brave and wronged leader. Her determination impressed even her foes. Over the centuries, Barissa's legend refused to die. She appeared again in statues raised during later ages, in poetry, in lessons, and in tales told to children. She became a symbol, especially for women, of courage and the spark that can never be snuffed out. The image of her chariot, its wheels bristling with iron, rolled forward through time, delivering a message of resistance. Though her remains may be lost to history, her voice did not fade away. It travels with the wind, crackles in the flames, and stirs in every person who has stood strong against cruelty, quietly declaring, "I will not bow." As the centuries have slipped by, Barissa's story still lingers across these lands. Her name is etched in stone, spoken in halls of power, and felt in the stubborn hearts of all who refuse to be forgotten. In a bustling city, near a great river, a bronze image shows her upright in her war chariot, daughters at her side, eyes forward and wheels lifted in silent protest. Below, the busy world moves on, people come and go, perhaps not realizing that they walk in the shadow of her fight. Yet her legacy is not only found in bronze and stone, but in what she stands for. Barissa became an unending challenge, one posed to every empire, every ruler who ignores those they govern. What happens when those left out find their voices? She was not flawless. Her rebellion brought violence and sorrow. Countless lives were lost. But history is shaped not by the faultless, but by those who risk everything to resist. True resistance is almost never gentle. What makes Barissa's story live on is not only her stand against Rome, it is the blaze she lit in human hearts. A woman who lost all, who kept her head held high, a leader who refused to be defined by her conquerors, a mother who shaped her pain into a weapon. Scholars still discuss her actions and her motives, but ask anyone from her homeland who she was, and they will not deliver a lecture. They will say she was the queen who made the empire bleed, the one who brought unity to a divided land, the warrior who proved that dignity can rise from destruction. She is no longer just a person from the past. She is a sign of defiance, of heart, and of the unwillingness to surrender freedom. Even as Rome rebuilt, redrew maps, and moved forward, it could not erase her memory. Her flame burns on in every struggle against injustice, each cry of no, and every spirit that would rather fall with pride than live in submission. Barissa is gone, but her legend carries on. In the minds of ancient peoples, illness was never meaningless. They did not speak of bacteria, viruses, or genes. Those ideas were still far away. To them, disease signaled a split, a loss of balance, a crack in the harmony between body, mind, soul, and the world around us. In the land between great rivers, sickness was often seen as fate's response to wrongdoing. A person might fall ill because of angering a god, breaking a rule, or drawing a curse. Diagnosis began with questions. What rules had you broken? Whom had you offended? Priests and wise folk worked together, reading the signs, chanting protective words, and setting out ceremonies alongside herbs and potions. In ancient China, the search for balance became almost scientific, guided by the ideas of yin and yang and the 5 elements. Health was keeping these opposing forces, hot and cold, wet and dry, active and resting, in harmony. Healers did not simply treat a cough. They wanted to know what time of day it appeared, how emotions changed, what circumstances surrounded it. Remedies were whole and connected: herbs, needles, food, movement, and rest. In Old Greece, the famous physician Hippocrates refused to believe that illness was caused by angry gods, but he still saw health as a kind of balance. His theory of four fluids guided Western thought for ages. Each needed to be in just the right amount, not too much, not too little. Too much of one, and not only the body, but also the spirit might suffer. All around the world this idea endured, the view that to be well meant being whole in body and soul. Whether it was the three doshas in India or beliefs in spirit-caused sickness in Africa, people of all lands understood that we are linked to the world, and if something shifts, illness may follow. So ancient healers did not just search for fevers or broken bones. They listened for where balance had been lost, and aimed to restore not just the body, but the world inside a person. In the heart of Egypt, medicine was both a careful science and a sacred task. The healers, revered as go-betweens for humans and the gods, held skills that seem surprisingly advanced, but were always wrapped in prayer and ritual. For them, illness might leave a mark on the body, but its roots could reach the spirit, the gods, and even the afterlife. Many lessons are drawn from medical scrolls, such as the Ebers Papyrus, over 3,000 years old, filled with treatments for headaches, hurts, and even growths. The Egyptians set bones, cleaned sores, watched heartbeats, examined what the body left behind, and drew on countless herbs that are used to this day. But every cure began with the approval of the gods. It was said that the wisdom god had shared the secrets of healing with people. Another, the lion-faced goddess, was both feared as a bringer of plague and prayed to for rescue. Words were crucial. Chants and prayers, spoken as balms were applied, were not empty. They were medicine in sound. Honey, sweet as it was, became their best disinfectant, and was used with resins and linen on wounds. Garlic and onions were given for the heart, and even bread with mold was pressed onto sores, a simple antibiotic, long before such things were understood. These healers served not only their neighbors, but also their rulers, and their reputation was so great that other civilizations sent for their help. Some specialized in stomach troubles, others in eyes, or in afflictions of the spirit. Yet always, the boundary between sacred and physical healing was blurred. Was a fever from the river's biting insects or from an irate spirit? Healing meant soothing the body, pleasing the gods, and fulfilling a quest for balance. To the Egyptian healer, restoring order, cosmic and personal, was the true goal. In India, the story of healing goes back thousands of years. There, the body was never seen as a machine, but as a mirror of the stars and elements. Their system, Ayurveda, comes from words meaning the knowledge of life. It is more than medical advice. It is a philosophy, a guide to living in rhythm with earth, seasons, and spirit. Ayurveda is rooted in the concept of three doshas: Vata for movement, Pitta for change and digestion, Kapha for stability and structure. Each dosha is a blend of 5 elements: earth, air, fire, water, ether. Each person's special balance is set from birth, and illness appears when that balance is upset by food, stress, or one's surroundings. Ancient books, written centuries before our own era, describe not just plants and tonics, but surgery, childbirth, and the ethics of caregiving. One scholar wrote about prevention as the first step in staying well. Another is regarded as the father of surgery in this tradition. He detailed operations, special tools, and even a method for rebuilding noses, using skin from the cheek. Far before such ideas took root in the West, these arts were practiced here. But the heart of Ayurveda is unity. Caring for the body also means nurturing the mind and spirit. Healing might involve not just herbs, but breathing exercises, oil massage, careful fasting, and daily routines. Plants such as turmeric, holy basil, and ashwagandha became valued healers. The practitioner might help a fever with remedies, but would also ask about sleep, worries, and what burdens the digestion. Ayurveda teaches this gentle truth. You are not apart from nature. You are woven into it. When you are ill, it is a gentle reminder to return to the balance where health lives. In ancient China, living well was never just about having a strong body. It was about the flow of life itself. The energy, called qi, was believed to move through all things, and well-being came from keeping this energy clear and unblocked. Chinese healers studied nature's changes, the cycle of seasons, the shifting moon, and the balance between darkness and light, warmth and cool, rest and movement. Two principles, yin and yang, explained all things. Yin for cool, inward, slow. Yang for warm, outward, bright. The 5 elements, wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, touched every organ, every feeling. Health was not static. It meant these forces were at peace. A fever, then, was not merely heat, but too much yang. Feeling worn out suggested too little yin. Diagnosis was an art, turning to eyes, voice, stomach troubles, even dreams, as clues. Treatment called on many skills: needles to free the flow of qi, burning mugwort on special points, gentle cupping to draw out illness, teas and roots, movement and food. The oldest books still used today taught that fears and sorrows could disrupt the inside, and that to heal, emotions and surroundings must be seen as one. Chinese medicine never parted the mind from the living world. To mend the person, the healer listened not just for the beat of the heart, but for the movement of qi, a melody as real as any pulse. In the lands of Greece and Rome, medicine began to step away from pure belief in the gods, moving carefully towards reason and study, though the idea of balance still ruled all. Here, the body was steered by the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, each tied to a mood and a natural force. Good health meant the right mix. Sickness came from too little or too much of one element. Physicians like Hippocrates, their teacher, always urged careful observation. Never cause harm. Watch the patient closely. Treat the person as a whole. They took into account the seasons, weather, and feelings. Special healing places were scattered across their lands, more spiritual retreat than simple hospital. There, people fasted, cleansed, prayed, dreamt of healing, and waited for answers from the gods in their sleep. In these sanctuaries, reason and belief worked together. Later in Rome, doctors like Galen pushed medicine forward with careful study. He learned from treating gladiators, examining animals, correcting ancient texts. His teachings shaped medicine for hundreds of years. Though some ideas were later proven wrong, the legacy of seeking knowledge, not just relying on magic, took hold. Yet still, the body was seen as a delicate system. If you could understand it, you could restore harmony. Long before written books and schools, native peoples in every part of the world were caring for each other, guided by wisdom passed down through families, dreams, and daily life. For them, healing was not a job, but a way of living, woven into every ceremony and every change of season. In these cultures, the medicine person was much more than a healer. They were spiritual guides, storytellers, teachers, and the keepers of traditions. Illness did not simply mean something was wrong inside. It meant something had gone astray in a person's relationship with the world, the community, the spirits, or their own hearts. Healing meant restoring those ties. Plants were essential. The knowledge of roots and leaves, of bark and berries, ran deep. From the forests to the plains, people knew which herb soothed pain, which leaf fought fever, which smoke cleansed soul and body. Yet healing wasn't only about the right plant. It was about respect, intention, and ceremony. Healers worked with the unseen as much as the seen. They held sweat lodge ceremonies, vision quests, and sacred dances. Sometimes illness was believed to come from spirits, from a broken taboo, or from part of the soul fleeing after hardship. In these moments, the healer called the soul back with gentle words and sacred acts, believing that true recovery meant becoming whole again. Similar beliefs grew among other indigenous peoples. In the rainforests, shamans drank powerful medicine plants, guided by dreams, not for escape, but for knowledge and relief. In Aboriginal Australia, healing drew on earth, ritual, and the ancient stories. Everywhere, the earth itself was the great healer, and true medicine was less about battling disease and more about remembering the deep truth of who we are. Across every ancient land, healing required more than tools and herbs. It required the spirit. Whether a sickness was thought to come from a god's anger, from an out-of-balance heart, or from an unseen wound, people everywhere believed that true recovery began with what could not be seen or touched. In Mesopotamia, before there were doctors as we know them, people turned to holy men to drive away sickness. They believed illness came from angry spirits or gods, and their cures were elaborate. Whispered prayers, clay tokens buried for protection, and careful rituals were all part of the hope for relief. The ritual was not set apart from healing. It was the heart of healing. Egyptian healers, too, never bandaged a wound or anointed a cut without first calling on the gods. Every act of care, every word spoken, was believed to shape the sick person's journey toward balance. In parts of Africa, story, dance, and drum invited the help of ancestors and spirits. The herbal medicine came only after the healer had spoken with the world beyond. Even in Greece, patients sought answers through dreams in holy places after nights of prayer and ritual washing. For the people of old, ritual gave suffering a name and a rhythm, gathered people together, and turned fear into hope. It was a way to say, even here, you are not alone. Today, scientists study the gentle power of belief, the way hope or trust can change the course of illness. The ancient healers had no need for proof. They had always known that words spoken with care could reach deeper than any blade, and that the most important wounds are often hidden. When we imagine ancient surgery, we might think of crude blades, fearful hands, and endless pain. The reality is far more remarkable and close to our own. All around the world, people learned to perform surgery with great skill and careful attention. They had no modern tools, no advanced pain relief or protection from infection, only their hands, their courage, and the slow knowledge passed from elder to apprentice. In India, the old books describe over 300 types of operations. The teacher, Sushruta, is called the father of surgery. He taught how to remove growths, mend broken bones, repair hernias, and even rebuild noses lost to injury or punishment. He wrote careful instructions for using different blades and forceps, and understood the need for cleanliness and knowing the body inside and out. Egyptian records also show healers using stitches, treating dislocations, and draining infection. Tools of bronze, bone, or fire have been found with their mummies. Some even carried out skull surgery. The proof remains in the skeletons of those who survived the ordeal. Elsewhere, in South America, for example, A surprising number of people survived large operations on the skull, often performed on wounded fighters, perhaps with some help from plants to dull the pain. In the Greek and Roman world, doctors learned still more from tending to gladiators' wounds and examining animals. Roman medics developed ways to stop bleeding, clamp vessels, and clean battle injuries. Surgery was risky, but it was also respected, a testimony to faith in hope and skill. These surgeons were not mere butchers, but artists of their craft. Their work lives on, every time a doctor lifts a blade for healing, not harm. In our own age, we have machines that scan our bodies in seconds, robotic arms for delicate work, and medicines that cross the globe at the press of a button. Yet, if you look closely, the gentle voices of the ancient world still sound quietly alongside us. Ayurveda is found in yoga and herbal teas. Chinese remedies fill shops and drawers. Indigenous rituals are welcomed in hospitals. Young doctors still repeat a version of the Hippocratic Oath, vowing to cause no harm, as their ancient teachers did. In today's clinics, we use precise instruments not so distant from those made in the past. Ideas like care for the whole person, prevention, and mind-body connection, the pillars of modern holistic health, are rooted deep in ancient soil. Science now repeats what the ancestors believed, that sorrow, loneliness, and stress can wear down the body as surely as disease. Meditation now has scientific proof, but its roots go back to ages when sitting quietly was already called healing. Forest walks, based in age-old nature practice, are prescribed for worry. The healing power of belief, the placebo, still surprises modern research. It might be easy to call old medicine simple or out of date, but when we look again, we often find a deeper wisdom, a way of seeing suffering as not just a crack in the body, but a message from the heart or spirit. That truth remains important. Medicine, at its core, is not only about cure, but about making sense, about bringing comfort, about being there, about truly seeing each other. The ancients did not have all our answers, but they understood that healing is sacred work. As we stride forward into an age of new technology, of artificial minds and personalized cures, perhaps we're not leaving old wisdom behind at all. Perhaps, with new tools, we are returning to an ancient way, with the same longing for balance, for wholeness, for true healing for body and spirit alike. Her name travels through the ages, soft and incomplete, like the tune of a half-remembered song. Sappho, a poet from a green island in the sea, was born perhaps around 630 years before the Common Era. Her words once moved listeners beneath the stars, and even the faded fragments left to us still speak with gentle longing. Unlike the heroes and rulers praised in old tales, Sappho's fame didn't spring from battles or blood, but from the heart. Her gift was not waging war, but capturing feeling, love and envy, beauty and sadness, joy and hope. With words, she gathered fleeting moments, a smile, a shy look, the softness of touch, and held them safely in her verses, as if pressing a wildflower between the pages of time. We know almost nothing about her daily life. No pictures, no journals remain. All we have are remnants, lines rescued by others, scraps quoted in books, or found on ancient papyrus, lost for centuries. And yet, these small pieces shine. The philosopher Plato called her the 10th muse. Later writers and readers would chase the traces of her work, seeking to rebuild the puzzle of her short life. Sappho was likely born into a family of standing on Lesbos, a place of song and learning, where poetry was part of daily living. She may have had brothers, a child, and even enemies, though the old records are unclear. She lived through trouble and stillness, was banished for a time, then returned. Her world did not welcome women's voices outside the home, but Sappho quietly set herself apart, not by breaking rules openly, but by crafting beauty. She wrote in the soft language of her region, making her songs fit for voice and string. Evening star, you return all that the bright day has scattered. Lines like this have outlived centuries. Then, as quietly as she entered the written record, Sappho faded. Most of her writing vanished, burned, neglected, or hidden. But what escapes destruction still proves a simple truth. She needed no statue. Her words are their own monument. When we speak of honest love, of deep feeling in poetry, we are still echoing Sappho's name. To know Sappho, you must first imagine Lesbos, the island that shaped her. Lesbos was far from a forgotten place. Its fertile land, olive groves, and wildflowers made it both a physical and artistic haven. Unlike the busy life of Athens, Lesbos had a slower rhythm, one steeped in music and poetry. There, song was not mere pastime, but devotion. Lyres and voices sounded out in homes and temples. Poetry was not for reading quietly, but for singing aloud, shaped by wind, sea, and memory. Sappho's own city bustled with politics and culture. She experienced exile and return. Art and rivalry were all part of her life. Lesbos was also rare for creating spaces where women could gather. Young women of noble families studied music and poetry together, perhaps in circles led by Sappho herself. These were places of learning, ritual, and sometimes close friendship. Here, Sappho addressed other women by name. She grieved their partings, honored their grace, and wrote of love with gentle bravery. In one simple fragment she pleads, "I have not had one word from her. Please, bring her back to me." These words come not from legend, but living emotion, a circle of young women, singing at twilight, stringing together joy and hurt into song. Time would later warp her legacy, add scandal, or try to erase her story. Yet Lesbos itself was the root of her truth, a wellspring of art, connection, and honest feeling. Sappho did not just live there. She became its voice. In an age when epic poems told of gods and warriors, Sappho wrote of the heart. She did not describe great battles, but quiet gestures, a trembling hand, a glance, a voice that made the heart race. She was among the first to say, "I," in poetry, not just narrating, but experiencing. She wrote as a woman to women about women, rare indeed in the Greece of her time. The world she lived in kept women's words inside, away from public life. Men claimed the stage, the scroll, and the school. Sappho quietly stepped beyond this, not by force but by art. Her poems did not demand space, they made their own, a private universe where feeling was a strength. There, naming the beloved was not forbidden. She remembered laughter, scent, the way hair shone in the light. One famous fragment describes the ache of jealousy as she watches a beloved woman speak to someone else. "He is like a god, that man beside you, listening to your laughter." Here, Sappho is not the hero, but a witness, loving quietly from afar, expressing longing anyone can recognize. Her words are sensual, but never cheap. Each phrase paints the nearness of beauty, the closeness of skin, the meeting of eyes in the night. Later centuries were unsure about how to receive her. For some, her honesty was too much. For others, her love was misunderstood or rewritten. Yet her poetry was always more than story. It was lived truth, made musical and clear. Sappho's songs were never meant to be silent. In her day, Poetry was sound, vivid and shared. She wrote short, melodic lines, meant to be sung with the lyre's gentle strings. The lyric poem, where our word lyrical comes from, was quiet, personal, immediate. It was a sigh, a confession, a love letter set to music under the trees. Sappho's mastery showed in her use of a gentle regional language. Her favorite rhythm is now named after her. The pattern moves in 3 longer lines and a short closing one, like a breath let go after longing. These poems would have been sung among friends, possibly students or priestesses, gathered for learning or ritual. Through sharing these performances, Sappho taught others, passing down not only words, but a whole way of feeling together. We can only imagine how it felt. The pluck of a string, the quiet rise of her voice, the attentive stillness of her listeners. Many poems begin with a question or a soft prayer, an invitation to speak or to listen. These lines reached up to the gods, deep into desire, and, perhaps most astonishing, feel timelessly fresh. Even set to modern music, Sappho's words ring true. She turned every emotion into a melody, reminding us that each longing or thrill deserves a song. Her music still vibrates, gentle and bold, after all these centuries. For each line of Sappho's that lives, there may be dozens lost, broken bits, scattered thoughts. Some fragments come as full lines. Others are only a word, a wish, an unfinished sentence. And still, these remain alive, like glowing coals after the flames have died down. What silenced her? Time, turmoil, and, sadly, human hands. Sappho's complete works once filled multiple books, stored in the famed library at Alexandria, copied and shared far and wide. But as ages changed, libraries burned, and what was not lost by accident was sometimes thrown away on purpose. When new faiths and new ways of life took over, some called her poetry unfit, dangerous, or unworthy to save. Her truth, especially love between women, was often the reason. What survived was preserved by quoting scholars, usually for her style. Then, about a century ago, new discoveries began to surface. Ancient scraps of papyrus found in the sands of Egypt, carrying back lost lines of her songs. In 2004, a larger piece was found wrapped around a mummy in a German collection. Each recovery felt miraculous, but so much is still missing. We read her today through these faint echoes, wishing to know what was lost. For all that is gone, what we have left matches the message of her poetry. Moments slip away, beauty fades, but still, the feeling lingers. Perhaps it is fitting that her voice reaches us in pieces, a mystery to piece together, a whisper that refuses to be silenced. Sappho's words were so open, so direct, that they often drew criticism. In her own lifetime, she was respected and honored for her skills. Plato placed her near the muses themselves. But as new beliefs spread, her story was often changed or shadowed by those who came after. Why? Because her poems spoke honestly about longing, especially for other women. She named those she missed, remembered their scent and laughter, praised their closeness. In her own world, such affections between women were not shocking. But later generations were uneasy. Some altered her words, made her pain into that of a woman pining for a man, even invented tales of her leaping from cliffs for unreturned love. These were ways to make her story less troubling for those who wanted her to fit a different mold. Others dismissed her altogether, or made her a symbol of heartbreak instead of passionate strength. Still, she endured. Even when Sappho became a code or secret for queerness, her name pressed forward, giving courage to many who found comfort in her example. Arguments continue. Who was she, really? A teacher? A lover? An idea? A danger? The better question may be, why do we still fear her honesty? Sappho did not shape herself for anyone's convenience. She simply shared what she felt. To many, her so-called scandal was just her willingness to speak. If there was any spirit that watched over Sappho, it was Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and desire. To her, Aphrodite was more than a name. She was a source of comfort, a listener, almost a friend. Sappho's most famous poem is not only about love, but a direct request. Come now, if ever you've heard my call, free me from this hard trouble, grant my heart's wish. There is no shame or fear in her yearning. Sappho's longing is not sinful or weak. It is divine, a feeling so deep that it becomes sacred. In ancient days, Aphrodite ruled not just romance, but yearning, connection, even pain. Calling on her was accepting that love's sweetness is always one with its heartbreak. Sappho did not pretend love was easy. She wrote of its joys and its hurts. Love shook my soul as the wind shakes the trees on the mountain, she confessed. Here, love is a storm, not a gentle breeze. By bringing Aphrodite into her poetry, Sappho turned desire into something greater than the self. In her lines, the distinction between what is human and what is divine disappears. Sappho's death is as mysterious as her birth. We do not know how she died, at what age, or what happened in her last days. Some legends suggest she passed quietly, surrounded by dear voices and familiar sights. Others, stories shaped long after her time, imagined her flinging herself from a high rock for love of a man. There is no proof for these tales. They likely serve only to reshape her story into something more like the world wanted. The fact is simpler. After her death, Sappho's work outlived her. For generations, philosophers and playwrights quoted her, and her poetry was taught across the ancient world. Her fame once rivaled even Homer's. But as time passed and new rules took over, voices like hers faded. Much was likely lost on purpose, seen as too bold, too honest. Many centuries later, tiny parts of her poetry returned, dug up by those wishing to know her. Not through heroic legends, but through the slow rescue of words. She did not need a dramatic end. Her poems were already immortal, living on in the spaces and silences the world left behind. Even though we know so little of her, Sappho's influence never faded. It grew. In each generation, someone found her anew. In the Renaissance, lovers of poetry marveled at her ability to express feeling. In the Romantic Age, her name found mention in song and verse. In our own time, as more find strength to speak about love without shame, Sappho becomes a beacon, a symbol of resilience, creative gift, and the right to feel deeply. Her name fills our language. Sapphic is a word for love between women. Lesbian, taken from her island home, now speaks to countless people around the world. These aren't just words. They are echoes of her presence. Artists, poets, and singers continue to be drawn to her memory. Painters picture her at the strings of her lyre. Poets translate her again and again, always seeking the living heart inside the lines. Modern writers reimagine her, bringing her voice into new songs and stories. What truly matters isn't whether her poems are whole or her life clearly told. It's the living pulse beneath her words, the breath of desire and awe, the reverence for beauty that we all crave. Sappho's real gift was never just the poetry, but the presence she offered. A sense that to feel deeply, to long and to love is not just a part of living, but a kind of truth. And so long as words can capture a heart's ache or joy, Sappho will remain, not only as a memory, but as a living presence, offering comfort to any soul who's ever dared to love, quietly or boldly, whether the world allowed it or not.